Another thing, this is just an example, and now I'm getting into slides that my science commons guys have, so don't ask me too many hard questions later. But if you search for something like signal transduction pyramid neurons into Google, you'll end up and you'll get 88,000 papers, right? There's really no way you're going to read 88,000 papers to try to figure out, because it'll take you about 200 years if you do a paper a day, right? So the idea is, what you want is, you don't want a list of documents. We're very good at the www Google layer of indexing documents. We're very bad at indexing knowledge. And so one of the things that what we're trying to do is, you actually want a list of genes. So what we launched this month is a thing called NeuroCommons, which is, we got all kinds of people who have ontologies and databases about neurology to come together, and we've created a map of all of these databases. So this is basically information about information. So these are publicly accessible databases all over the place, and ontologies that map these things together. So one thing that's called one thing on one database, and what's called on another database. And we've also created a query language, which is slightly difficult to read. But you remember back in the old days when you got HTML and you didn't really understand it when you did view source, but you kind of just like replaced the bits that you understood and you could copy and paste. This is kind of like HTML for databases. And what this is doing is it's saying, okay, look for pyramid neurons and the journal entries in PubMed, cross-reference and find those genes that are involved in signal transduction. And so when you do this query, and the neat thing is you can see each other's queries and share queries, you come up with all the genes and then the things that it does, right? And because this is actually what you want from the search result that we just did earlier in Google. And then you convert it into a URL, which is kind of messy and not obviously not ugly. But when you put this in a view, in a browser, you get this, which is basically, show me all the signal transduction genes on the cell surface of pyramid neurons. Now, that's a very specific query that somebody slightly skilled would have to create. But then what you do is you go in, and I can go in and say, well, actually, let's change this to cancer. Let's do ribosomal proteins and blah, blah, blah. And you edit this query. And suddenly, now you can say, okay, well, no, show me these. And so this is very much like show view source in HTML, where people are now putting these databases together. And so that all the databases in NeuroCommons, if you want to add your database in NeuroCommons, you just participate, we do a review, and we add it in. We've also made the process of creating NeuroCommons open, and all the code that we use for this database system open. So this is basically, by the way, almost a replica of what a pharmaceutical company uses internally from a knowledge management, except it's all open source now. So you can actually then go and say, okay, well, I want to do a sustainability technology commons. And you could use the same system and replicate all of that, because we're making it all free. And then eventually, if you get, this is like a typical phrase from a academic paper. And it's not, if you, in the W3C sort of World Wide Web days, now you want to be able to click on all this stuff, right? So this is what we want all academic research to look like with open access. The problem is, this is an actual license of a database that the University of California signed. It says subscribers shall not use spider, web crawling, or other software programs, routines, blah, 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 blah. So even with databases that are relatively open that you're allowed to use, you can't actually go back and add those links. And so this is the kind of devil in the detail stuff that we're kind of good at, which is let's try to create standardized licenses that allow you to put these databases together to try to create these kinds of queries and things like that. And it's a slightly different problem than the stuff that we've been doing in the cultural side, but this is actually a very important issue. And to me, it's kind of interesting because if you go back to the history of the internet, it was the supercomputer scientists that created TCP/IP. It was the academic papers that kind of got the W3C together, because it's pretty low-hanging fruit. The funders want them to work together. The researchers want them to work together. There's really no good reason why we shouldn't be sharing at that level. There isn't a kind of, Hollywood that we're fighting against here. It's just plain stupid friction that we're fighting with here. This is a final example. What we did was Paul Allen spent about $100 million creating these maps of the mouse brain mapped with these are the different colors of the genes that are active on the mouse brain. And it wasn't being used very much. It's this huge database of images. And so what some of our guys did was they took that, put it into our neurological system, and they poured all this data into Google Maps, right? And this broke the terms of service, obviously. So, well, not obviously, but it did break the terms of service. And they went and showed the Paul Allen folks and said, oh, this is wonderful. This is amazing. You can now scroll and zoom into this thing. It's so much more easy to use. And we license all these things under an open source license and a free software license, but they changed their terms of service to allow us to do this. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting is most researchers want people to see their stuff, and most of this stuff isn't really commercially being sold. In fact, it's just sitting around. And by just creating open source tools, creating the sort of semantics and the ontologies, and getting these things together and showing people examples, we've been able to get the scientific community to understand how lowering the friction, lowering the transaction costs, like we've been doing in the other areas of Creative Commons, will be a huge win for these guys. And a lot of they're not even at Web 1.0 right now. These are literally just text databases that are both technically and legally unconnected. And just by connecting together now, we're going to get a lot of progress. And I'm raising this a little bit here in Hong Kong because we're finding that the U.S. government and a lot of the large foundations are really excited about this idea. And I think that it's one of the things where it's not the typical angle that the Creative Commons folks are talking to, but if you are involved in scientific research or know people involved in scientific research, this is actually a pretty easy sell if you can explain it. So, and whenever you need, we'll send the guys that are actually working on this over to explain it to me. Thank you.